Good morning. Happy Father's Day. My name is Lance. I'm one of the pastors here at Faith Bible Church. Excited to be with you this Sunday morning. Like a lot of dads in the room, I find myself at times having to build something for my kids. We purchase something. Of course, assembly is required, and I'm not much of a builder, but sometimes it's just required when you're a dad. So a couple of years ago, we decided to get our kids a big Christmas gift. We're lucky enough every Christmas, we try to have one thing every year that's kind of a surprise, something they don't see coming, something that's kind of big. In December of 2020, we decided that would be a basketball goal. Both kids are kind of into basketball. We could tell that's a sport they were going to play, they were going to enjoy, and so we decided to finally get a real basketball goal to put in the driveway. Well, of course, we got it for Christmas, so I didn't want to put it together too soon. We didn't want to ruin the surprise, so I saved it for Christmas Eve to put it together. It was in a big box, but I figured there can't be much to it. Attach a couple of things, put it up, finish it in a couple hours, no problem. So around noon on Christmas Eve, I went outside to start putting this basketball goal together. And as soon as I opened the box, I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. There were so many more parts in that box than I expected. And in the midst of all those parts, I was looking for an instruction manual, and I found it, and what I was expecting to be sort of a 4-page instruction manual was something like 30 to 35 pages. And I thought, oh no, we're in trouble. So I got to work. I started building. And the thing was, I only had a couple hours, because it's Christmas Eve, right? So we go to Christmas Eve service. So I worked for a couple hours. Nothing even looked close to a basketball goal yet. And we had to leave. We had to go to Christmas Eve service. We had dinner. We had time with family. And so we finally got home, we got the kids to bed, and I went back outside in the dark and in the cold to try to build this basketball goal in my driveway in the middle of the night. This is me just like looking at the instruction manual, just going, this doesn't make sense. I look like I'm close to being done there. I wasn't close to being done. That thing wouldn't have held up. But during that process, I found myself frustrated over and over again. This isn't moving as quick as I want it to. Things aren't making sense as they come together. I found myself confused at times, thinking I was missing parts, or am I doing this the right way? You know, those instruction manuals, they give you pictures of all the parts, and then you look at it and all the parts look exactly the same. So you're trying to figure out what goes where. A couple times I have to admit I was embarrassed because I put something together backwards and then I had to redo it, put it back together. It took a long time, but here's the thing. Failure was not an option on Christmas Eve. My wife Ginger made that clear. It was clear in my own mind. We have to get this thing together. I can't have my kids wake up Christmas morning and walk out to just a pile of parts sitting in the driveway. And so I kept at it. I kept building. And finally, I think around 3 a.m, we got the basketball goal together to where I felt like, okay, this is going to work. This is good. And so the next morning, felt like 2-3 hours after I went to bed, my kids burst into the room ready for Christmas morning. And so we do a couple of things inside, and finally we lead them out to the driveway to show them the basketball goal. And I tell you, that's where it sort of all became worth it. So tired, worn out, thinking, why did I do this? My kids saw the basketball goal, and I got all the excitement and all the joy out of it I was hoping for. And so they walked out, they saw it, they loved it. We played basketball for a couple hours. And it was in that moment that I was like, that's why I kept building this thing. That's why I stuck with it when I wanted to give up. I kept building because in my heart, I knew that it was worth it. I knew that it would bring some joy. I knew that it would bring my kids something that they could enjoy and be happy with. And that's why I kept building. And most of you have had some kind of experience like that, where you're trying to build sort of a physical thing and you get frustrated and you're trying to figure out what's this thing going to turn into. You can't necessarily see what the result's going to be. But I would say all of us are sort of figuratively building something with the way we live our lives. The way we live our lives, the choices we make, the things we do, we're building something with the way we live our lives. You know, a lot of us are trying to build a successful career. We're trying to build a career that matters, that we're advancing in what we do, that we're doing well in our profession. And with that, we're trying to build some financial security so we can be comfortable, so we can feel secure. A lot of us are trying to build the kind of family we hope for. And maybe you're at the beginning of that process. You're single, but you're hoping to meet that person to marry that you can build a family with. Maybe you're ready to have kids, or you're having kids, and you're trying to build the type of family that you always dreamed of. Maybe all of us are trying to build some kind of community. We're trying to build a life where we have friends, we have people we can enjoy life with, people we can spend time with and trust and count on. We're all trying to build something with the choices we make, with the way we live our lives. And in the same way that we experience frustration and some doubt as we build physical things, sometimes we experience frustration and doubt as we try to build the life that we pictured for ourselves. Maybe the career doesn't turn out quite like you thought it would. You're not where you thought you'd be. Maybe financially, you're not where you thought you'd be. You thought you'd have more money right now. You thought you wouldn't have to worry about it by now. And you've been building towards that, but you're not there yet. Maybe you've been building this ideal family, this family that you had in your mind, and it's not looking the way you thought it would. You had this life you were trying to build, but maybe you didn't have a manual, and you thought it would look a certain way, and now it doesn't. And that can be frustrating. And that can make you wonder, what have I been building this whole time? The question I want to ask you today is this: what has God asked you to build with your life? What has God asked you to build with your life? And if you knew what that was, if you know what it is that he's asking you to build, are you willing to stick with it, to keep building, even when you can't quite see where it's headed? So as some of you know, we're in a series right now talking about the type of faith that inspires. We're working our way through one chapter of the book of Hebrews, Hebrews 11. And if you remember a couple of weeks ago, Russell sort of gave us some context to this letter. We don't know who wrote it, but what we do know is that this letter was written to Christians who had a Jewish background, Jewish Christians, and they were facing some persecution. They were facing some trials. And they had sort of done well under their first round of trials, but as the trials started to ramp up again, and as it was looking like they were going to face more persecution, there were quite a few of them that were probably ready to throw in the towel, to give up. And so the book of Hebrews, and specifically as we come to chapter 11, was written to inspire them, to motivate them, to get them to say, we're going to stick with it, to encourage them to endure. And to do that, Hebrews 11 reminded them of all these different characters that you can find in the Old Testament, all these individuals who operated in faith, who stuck with it, who endured. And he wrote that to these believers and wrote that for us to be inspired by their faith, to be encouraged by their faith. So a couple weeks ago, Rick talked about Abel and the sacrifice he made. Last week, Jamie talked about Enoch and how Enoch walked with God and was taken up into heaven. Today, we come to the character of Noah. And as we come to Noah, I want to remind you of Hebrews 11:1 and what it says faith is. It says it's the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. The conviction of things unseen. That's going to be really important in the story of Noah. So let's look at it. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7 says this. It says, by faith Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So let's start with Noah. It says, by faith Noah. Who was Noah? Well, chances are, of all Old Testament characters, you're probably all very familiar with Noah. I tried to look up last night how many films have been made about Noah, and I couldn't quite figure it out because so many movies have been made about the story of Noah. Chances are, if you grew up in church, you've got a couple of children's songs running in your head right now that have to do with Noah. We're very familiar with this story. It's probably one of the earliest stories you've known from the Bible. But what I want to say about that is this, that sometimes that familiarity can sort of work against us because we get so familiar with a story that we kind of think we know the point of it, or we forget the point of it, we forget the weight of it, we forget the significance of it because it's become so familiar to us. And that's what can happen with the story of Noah. This is one of the most significant stories in the Old Testament. More space is given to the character of Noah in the book of Genesis than most other characters in that book. It's an important story, but that familiarity can work against us. And so we want to talk a little bit about who was Noah. What did he do? Well, you meet Noah in Genesis chapter 5. Noah was the son of someone named Lamech. So we talked about Enoch last week. Enoch had a son named Methuselah, which you know that name, one of the oldest characters in the Bible. Methuselah had a son, Lamech. Lamech had Noah, and he gave Noah this name. Noah's name means rest. And in giving him that name, they were looking ahead to something God has promised. When Noah was named, they said, this one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed. So see, ever since this promise, there was this promise in Genesis 3 that God would put an end to the curse of sin and give his people rest. And his people were watching and waiting for someone who might do that. And Noah's name is sort of an indicator that they thought he might play a role in that. His name means rest. And so we meet Noah in Genesis chapter 5, but we really start to learn who Noah is in Genesis chapter 6, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. Genesis 6, starting in verse 9, this is where we really start to learn who Noah is. It says this, verse 9, "These are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God. Noah became the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." So we learn a few important things about Noah just in this short verse. First, we learn that Noah was a righteous man. Now, all this means, it simply means that Noah was a good man who lived according to God's standards of behavior. He lived the way God wanted his people to live, and that was unique in the day that Noah lived in. But he also says that Noah was blameless in his time. Now, the word for blameless there, it's actually not used nearly as much to refer to people as that word righteous is. It's pretty unique to call someone blameless because the idea of being blameless was wholeness or completeness. In fact, Psalm 15 says to be blameless, using that same word, it was seen as a prerequisite to have fellowship with God. And that leads to the next thing we're told about Noah, which is that Noah walked with God. Now, we learned what that means last week when Jamie taught us about Enoch and how Enoch walked with God. And it means that he was on the same purpose, path, and pace that was needed to walk with God. He talked to God and he listened to God the way you would when you're walking with someone. And so Noah was a man who was righteous, blameless. He walked with God. He had 3 sons. And what did Noah do? Well, back to Hebrews 11, it says that Noah, being warned by God about things not yet seen. He was warned by God about things that he hadn't seen yet. Going back to Genesis 6, verse 11, here's what that looked like. "Now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. God looked on the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. Then God said to Noah, 'The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them, and behold, I am about to destroy them with the earth.'" So you can tell from the words used sort of over and over in this passage how bad it had gotten in Noah's time. 3 times he uses that word corrupt. It was ruined. When God looked at the earth, he saw that it was ruined. It's filled with violence. And because of that, God tells Noah that he's going to do something he hadn't ever done before. He's going to destroy everyone in it. He's going to destroy everything and everyone on earth. Now, I wonder how Noah handled this information, because it's not something he had ever seen before. It's not something that was even expected at any point. Much like today, I don't know about you, it feels like most of my life, you didn't have to look far to find someone in the news who was saying the world is about to end. It just happens every now and then. We find someone in the news that's saying, hey, the world's going to end, or this one thing happens and things are all going to fall apart. It's just sort of a constant thing you see in the news, and we sort of get desensitized to it. In fact, I would guess if I was today to just say, hey, I just heard from God, I want you guys to know the world's going to end tomorrow, you would probably not take me seriously. It wouldn't affect your day that much. You wouldn't want me to preach again, but you wouldn't take that message seriously, because we just don't. We just think, no, that's not going to happen. And so Noah gets this message from God, and he's told that this thing is going to happen that's never happened before. He hadn't seen anything like it before, and there probably wasn't any indication in the world that it would happen. It's interesting, actually, because in Matthew 24, Jesus, he's talking about his return, and he's talking about when he will come back, and he's saying no one will know the day or the hour. And when he says that, he references the days of Noah, because he says it's going to be like the days of Noah, when they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So here's what that means. Not only was Noah told, hey, this thing's going to happen that he had never seen before, nobody around him would have taken that message seriously. Nobody. They had no reason to. Yeah, from God's perspective, the world was corrupt, it was ruined. But from their perspective, everything was great. To everyone but Noah, things were great. Things were going well. That's what Jesus said during that time. They were marrying, they were giving in marriage, they were eating and drinking. They had no reason to think that the world would soon be destroyed. So for Noah, what's coming is something he hadn't seen before, but then God asks him to do something that probably made no sense. Genesis 6:14. God said to Noah, "Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make the ark with rooms and shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit from the top and set the door of the ark in the side of it, and you shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. So I don't know if Noah had any concept of what he's being asked to build during this time. There couldn't have been any idea what this thing is going to be used for, what this thing is going to look like. The sheer size of it had to be overwhelming. And so we get these measurements in cubits, but what that means is in our measurements, that ark is about 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 35 to 40 feet high. It's massive. And it's described as just sort of this big floating box. Like, I find it interesting. There's no rudder on this thing. There's no steering it. It's just hope this thing floats and just trust God to take care of you. And so God tells him to build this thing that probably he doesn't even have a concept of. He just knows it's massive. He just knows it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of resources to build this thing. And he's probably wondering, why? Why do I need to build this thing? Well, God explained it to him in verse 17 of Genesis 6. He says, "Behold, even I, am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh, which is the breath of life. From under heaven, everything that is on the earth shall perish." So God had already told Noah what he planned to do. He said, I'm going to destroy everyone in the earth. But here he explained how he was going to do it. He says, I'm going to flood the earth. And this is why Noah needed to build this thing, because God has chosen Noah. God has selected Noah to survive this thing, to rescue him. Here's what he says, Genesis 6:18. He says, "But I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, and the animals after their kind. Every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive. As for you, take for yourself some of all food which is edible, and gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them." And so there's a promise that comes with this warning. God says, I'm going to establish a covenant with you. But to do that, Noah needs to survive it. So the earth is going to be destroyed. You need to build this ark. You need to bring your family aboard, bring all the animals aboard, bring food for your family. And in doing this, God would establish a covenant with Noah. You know, we keep talking in this section about things Noah hadn't seen before, things he probably didn't understand. And even the idea of a covenant was probably something new to Noah. It's the first time the word is used in the Bible, and Noah had to go on faith that God would be true to his word, that God would establish this covenant on the other side of building. Now, as the author of Hebrews said, Noah was warned by God about things unseen, and faith, like we said, is the conviction of things unseen. And so what did Noah do? God tells him, here's what I need you to do. Here's what I need you to build, and here's what you're going to do with that thing that you've built. Genesis 6:22. "Thus Noah did, according to all that God had commanded him, so he did." So even though he hadn't seen any of this happen before, even though he may not have had any concept of what this is going to look like, Noah did immediately as God told him to do. He did all that God had commanded him to do. Why? Why would he do that so immediately? You know, if it were me and I was told to do something this crazy, I might have a few questions. I might want a little bit more information. I might want to know a little bit more about the plan. I might even want to sort of negotiate and see if we could find a way to make this a little easier, to make it a little easier on myself. I mean, you think about what Noah is facing with this plan. It's going to take decades to build this thing. A significant portion of his life building this structure that he has no idea when it's going to come and how it's going to work. I also have to think the size of it, the amount of resources that go into it. How many people saw what Noah was doing and questioned him, ridiculed him, said, hey man, what are you doing? Why are you building this thing? This is a waste of time. This is a waste of resources. What are you doing? He had to have faced some ridicule for building this. I also wonder what kind of doubts might Noah have had. We know Noah was righteous. He was blameless. He walked with God, but I wonder if over the years he had moments wondering, am I doing the right thing here? Is this ever going to actually happen? Is it going to be worth it to build this thing? Why would it be worth it? Why did he keep building? Well, this is where the Hebrews passage is helpful because it gives us a little more information. So back to verse 7 of Hebrews 11. And we're told that Noah, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. In reverence, he prepared an ark. So it was reverence for God that motivated his obedience. What does that mean? Some versions might say reverent fear or holy fear, but it's not this cowering or intimidated type of fear, but instead it's a respect for God and a recognition that when God speaks of something, it's as if that thing has already happened. So Noah's view of God lends itself to immediate action when God speaks, because he has such a respect and such a concern for the word of God that obedience takes priority over what anyone else might think or say. So you might know this feeling in a small way. If you've ever had a boss or a teacher or a coach that you really respected, that you really trusted, chances are they've asked you to do things that you may not have understood. They've asked you to do things you didn't want to do. They might have asked you to do things that people around you said, hey, why are you doing that? I don't understand that. But typically in that type of relationship, you do what they ask, not because you understand necessarily, but because you have so much trust and respect for the person that you do what they ask you to do. And that's what we're talking about today. Noah, in reverence, prepared an ark. And so the author of Hebrews tells us that he did so. He did that in reverence, and he did it for salvation. For the salvation of who? Not just Noah, but Noah and his household, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. Noah had the faith in God to build what God told him to build. And as a result, and this is important, his kids and their kids and their kids had to experience that deliverance and that rescue that came through his act of faith. In the end of Hebrews 11:7, it tells us what he accomplished by doing that. By doing that, what did he accomplish? Well, he prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness, which is according to faith. So in taking action, Noah condemned the world, not necessarily through words, though that may have been part of it. 2 Peter talks about Noah as a preacher of righteousness, but what the author of Hebrews is saying here is that Noah's obedience to God's command sort of stands in contrast to the rest of the world that had turned away from God, the rest of the world that was disobedient. The faith Noah had to build proved everyone else guilty for their lack of faith. But he didn't just condemn the world. It doesn't stop there. It says he also became an heir of the righteousness that is according to faith. Now, when I read that at first, I think, what on earth does that mean? What does it mean to become an heir of the righteousness that is according to faith? Well, remember, from the beginning of this series, we talked about the type of faith that Hebrews 10 and 11 are referring to is that faith that sanctifies. There's a faith that justifies and puts us in right standing with God, but there's a type of faith after that that sanctifies. It brings us closer to God. It makes us more like Jesus, and it's rewarded both in this life and in the life to come. That's the type of faith we're talking about. Remember, Hebrews 10:35, the author encouraged the readers of the letter to not throw away their confidence because it would be richly rewarded. There were rewards waiting for them in their endurance. So Noah was an heir. It says he was an heir, meaning he received or he inherited something. And what he inherited was righteousness. One commentator on this passage, he says he received the quality of life which corresponded to his walk of faith. The quality of life that corresponded to his act of faith. And you can see those rewards in Noah's life when you read the rest of the story in Genesis. After over a year on that ark, a year on the water, the flood finally dries up. He and his family are able to walk out on dry land. When they do, God gives them a promise that he will never do that again. You remember the rainbow, his promise. Now you're in covenant with God. Noah is now in covenant with God, and his family benefits from it. So after acting in faith, Noah now has a relationship with God that would never change. He wasn't perfect. You can read the rest of the story of Noah and see, not perfect, but he's in a permanent relationship with God. So at the beginning, we talked about how we're all building something with the lives we try to lead. Whether we realize it or not, we're building something. You know, God told Noah to build, and Noah had to act on faith and build that thing. So what is God asking you to build? Each of us, what is God asking us to build with our lives? Well, I would start, when I think of that question, I would start with the Great Commission, this direction that Jesus gave us in Matthew 28 as he spoke to his disciples, and before he left the earth, he said, go make disciples of all the nations, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all that I commanded you. That's his directive to his disciples. And that commission applies to all of us, but what we have to do is sort of put that in our own context and figure out what that looks like for us. So at our church here, we have a mission statement, and it says pretty clearly what we want to build. It says at Faith Bible Church, our mission is to build generations of Jesus followers who take grace to our world. And that's a mission statement for our church, but I also feel like that's true for us as individuals, that God has called us to build generations of Jesus followers through the way that we live our lives. And that sounds like a big task. You're talking generations. And like Noah, it might require some obedience. It might require some faith when you can't really see where it's going, when you don't understand why you have to do certain things. It may require you to keep building when others around you ridicule you or don't understand what you're doing. You know, I can't imagine how many times Noah, as he built the ark, had someone come by and say, hey, what on earth are you building? Why would you do this? And so for us, for you, if you have a family, as other families around you may raise their kids differently, they may do things differently from you, and as you put your children's faith and your family's faith as a higher priority than success or esteem, as you say no to some things you might enjoy so you can focus more on being a family that consistently points toward Jesus, as you say no to certain things, as you make certain decisions, reorder your priorities and your values around being a family that wants to build generations of Jesus followers, you may have some people asking you, hey, what are you trying to build here? Why would you do it this way? You know, the culture you live in may view money and time and resources differently than you do. And as you sort of seek to be obedient to God and giving money away to Him and giving time away, serving others, helping others, you may have some people walking by saying, hey, what are you trying to build here? Why would you do this? If you're single in here and you're called to do relationships in a way that's totally counter to what the culture around you says is acceptable, and as you seek to sort of find a relationship and date and be in relationships in a way that's God-honoring and pure and consistent with what He's called you to do, you may have people asking you, what are you trying to build here? Why would you do it this way? I want to encourage you today, keep building when you're criticized. As you try to build generations, as you try to be a person that follows God in faith and builds something that points towards Jesus, keep building when you're criticized. Keep building when you're ridiculed. Be faithful to build what God has called you to build, because it can save not only your own life, but generations that follow you. Once you've done that, if you've already done that, think about the impact that could have when you do it. When you're faithful to build, think about the impact that could have. You know, if you shared the gospel with one person, with that one person that you know needs to hear it, that you've been thinking about sharing with, if you were to finally do that and they were to meet Jesus, how many more people might get to experience that because you did that one time? If you were to make the time to serve someone, to disciple someone, to mentor someone, to spend time with children or students or someone that you can mentor, that you can pour into, how many people's lives down the road could change because you did that? If you finally go on that mission trip, we have so many people right now this summer either on a mission trip or going. And if you finally took that trip that you've always been thinking about, but you just haven't quite taken that step to actually go, how many lives could be changed because you decided to go and let God use you, and because you decided to go and go be a part of building something that God has called you to build? Just speaking to the dads in here for a minute, and I know your goal today is to do nothing. Your wife asked you this morning, what do you want to do today? You said absolutely nothing. That's the goal. Do nothing today. Free pass. Do nothing. But after that, maybe tomorrow, think about what you want to build as a dad. Think about what you're building. Maybe other people have been setting your priorities and your values. Maybe you've been letting other things sort of determine what your family is building. And you might take a step back and look at it and go, we're not building what I want to be building right now. I want to build a family that consistently points towards Jesus and builds generations of Jesus followers that come after us. So if you're a dad, take some time to think about, what are we building? You know, Noah's faith led him to build something that brought salvation not just to himself, but also to his whole household. And the generations that would follow benefited from that. And you have an opportunity to do that same thing with the type of life you build, wherever you're at in that life. You have that opportunity too. You have an opportunity to build a life that consistently points towards Jesus. And because you continue to build that, your kids or your friends or those who come after you have a better chance of doing the same. So keep building that life, and it'll be richly rewarded.